Hi friends, so today we are going to deal with the first chapter of history, class 6, that is what, where, how and when. So you all might have wondered what incidents might have happened in the past and where and how did they happen and when, at what point of time did they take place. So let us dive into the chapter. Yeah, we go with the first slide. Here you find it, right? How do we find out? So how do you find out what happened many years ago, what people ate and what kind of clothes did they wear and where did they live? So how do you come to know the answers of all these questions? So all these questions, they can be answered by studying our past, that is our history. So these chapters, they help us to answer these questions. And most importantly, how did we find the answers to these questions is also answered in this chapter. So you yourself will be able to answer these questions. Like if I ask you, how did they find answers to all these questions? So you'll be able to answer. And now we'll go to the next slide. Here you're finding some two pictures, right? One is the India map and some pictures inside, and here is some other picture on the right side. So on the left side in the India map you find some, see here it's Jhansi Rani, I think some fighter on a horse, and these all pictures depict our culture, our past culture. Like here is some dance, and so here is some monument, and here is some statue, and here is a camel, and here there is some bullock cart, and here you find some, see here you find an Indian flag with all the fighters, some Jawans, and here you see a coin, right? And here you find Vivekananda's picture, and here you find some people dancing, and here you find some people dancing, and here some war taking place, and here it's like someone is doing some agriculture, and here you find some building which is built during past olden days. So these are all things. You might find some extra things also in this picture. So let's move on to the next slide. So where did people live? So your question, where did people live in the past? So the earliest people who lived here, they were called as skilled gatherers, because they used to gather all the food by roaming here and there. And they mostly lived along the river banks where there is more availability of food. Right? River is a good resource of water as well. Many crops, many fruits and vegetables grow near the river. So they can find them easily. So they chose to reside near the river. And they collected fruits, roots and other forest produce also, which would be useful for them. Right? Even wood is very useful for them. They can use it as some furniture kind of thing. And here the early people, they even hunted animals for the food. What you observe from all this, you just understood that they were actually just looking to gather something. They were just on the thought of gathering something, hunting something and eating something. They still did not start doing anything with their skill. So now let us see how some development has taken place in their lives. So till now you have seen them hunting animals for food and gathering fruits and roots for their food and searching for some forest produce for their food. And so as of now, that's the way of life they're leading. And now you can see on the right side some picture, right? This is some India map. This is an India map, and here here you can see these lines, right? These are called the rivers. And here you can see river Mahanadi, Godavari and Indus. So Indus used to be called as Sindhu. And you can also see few dynasties if you observe in this. See, it's like Andhra, Kalinga, Magadha, Saurashtra, Vanga. So these are all the dynasties also. You can look after this map later. You can find many places also, like the ancient places like Mohenjo-daro, etc. So let us move on to the next slide. So what are the early settlements? See, about 8,000 years ago, men and women, they first began to grow crops. See, When did they began to grow crops? You know, in the previous slide you saw that they were just gathering things, and now, like before 8,000 years from now, then they began to grow crops. What are the major crops that they grew, that they had grown? That is wheat and barley. So then slowly they started rearing animals like sheep and goat and cattle. You know, like right? Cattle is useful for milk. You rear cattle for milk, and sheep you rear them for the wool that you get, with which you can make some sweaters, etc. So they started even rearing cattle, sheep and goats. So you can see the enhancement, right? First they were just gathering things, and then they started growing crops, and then they started rearing animals, and then in that way some enhancement took place in their lives, and then the villages came out, like a group of people living at a particular place. Then it's called as a village, and then agriculture developed, like a group of people in a mass way. They started doing agriculture, and then near the Sulaiman and Kirtar hills, wheat and barley were first grown. So they would ask you what were the hills where barley was first grown. Then you must say it's Sulaiman and Kirtar hills. So later you can look into the map of India, the physical map, and then you can point out where Sulaiman and Kirtar hills lie. And then rice was first grown in the north of Vindhyas. You have Vindhya ranges, right? Vindhyas. So there the rice was first grown over there in the Vindhyas. And next slide. Around 4,700 years ago, the earliest cities started flourishing on the banks of the river Indus and its tributaries. So the first of the cities that started to flourish, started building on, like you saw villages have come out, and then they developed into cities. And the first of the cities you found near the river Indus and its tributaries. So in the banks of the rivers, you found those cities started evolving around 4,700 years ago. And then around 2,500 years ago, cities developed on the banks of the river Ganga too. So you find Indus at the northwest, right? See, you might have remembered when you saw this map. See, here is the Indus. So firstly, the cities have evolved near the river Indus. And then they started 2,500 years ago near the river Ganga. You find, see, Ganga is all flowing on the north. All this is Ganga. So see, river Ganga. Okay. So around 2,500 years ago, you even found the cities evolving on the banks of the river Ganga and its tributaries too. And then in the past, the area of the south of Ganga, it was known as Magadha. And now it lies in the state of Bihar. I told you, we just now saw the Magadha dynasty, etc. Right? So Magadha is the south part of Ganga is called as Magadha, and now it's merged into the state of Bihar. And then also, if it's a dynasty, of course, it would have rulers, right? So Magadha rulers, they established a large kingdom, and hence it's called a dynasty over there. And then kingdoms are established in other parts of the country too. And thus kingdoms are therefore civilizations, and kingdoms and civilizations came into existence. See, Ganga, near the river Ganga, as you saw in the previous points, near the river Ganga, and some cities evolved, and hence kingdoms and civilizations came into existence. And then and then in the next slide you have travels in ancient times. So what's the reason which made people to travel in the ancient times? What were the reasons exactly that led to traveling? And now people travel from one part of the subcontinent to another in search of livelihood, and also to escape from natural disasters like floods and droughts. You know, even when natural disasters come, you have to escape from them. And apart from this natural disasters and droughts also, even what does livelihood mean? Like, for the sake of a living, that is for food, shelter, etc. You have to move from one place to another because of some reasons. So that was the reason for the travel. And also merchants traveled with caravans or ships. Like they used to carry some valuable goods in those caravans and ships from one place to another in order to either establish trade relations with the kingdoms. So to establish even the trade relations with other kingdoms, they used to travel with all their valuable goods from one place to another on the caravans or ships. And then they marched in armies, like conquering others' lands or expanding their kingdoms. For that also they used to travel. And then even religious teachers, they used to walk from one village to another and even one town to another to advise or to preach their religious teachings. Even religious teachers used to travel from one place to another. So you see different reasons for traveling. Like few traveled in order to rescue themselves from disasters and for livelihood, and few for the establishment of trade, and few in order to expand their territories, and few to preach their religious teachings in order to spread their religion to all. So these were different kinds of reasons which led people to travel in ancient times from one place to another. So going to the next slide, what were the difficulties faced by the travel? So travelers used to face a few difficulties, right, during traveling. What were they? Like hills and high mountains used to come on the way, like traveling on the way to Himalayas and deserts. And even in the deserts you find blows of dust and storm hitting to you. Suddenly the dust storms they form and they hit on you. And rivers and seas, those all things were like obstacles to their journey, and they made the journey dangerous. And even people mainly traveled on foot or by caravans and carts, so their journey was very slow and it was tiresome. Like carts, it's just a bullock cart. See, you find here some inscription on a stone, right? Here someone is moving on a bullock cart and some two people are sitting back in this. So it's a tiresome journey, like you should be hitting that bull, and it's a slow way of transport. And then while traveling through forests, vulnerable attacks by wild animals, so it's very dangerous. So hills and mountains and seas, they were the natural frontiers of the subcontinent, and people from across the frontiers, they also came into the subcontinent and settled here. So yeah, so here what are the difficulties, right? So I think those were just the difficulties. And then moving on to the other points, these are in no way related to the above ones. So above you saw all the difficulties faced by the travelers, and here the other set of points, like hills, mountains and seas, they were the natural frontiers of the subcontinent, and even people across these frontiers, they came into the subcontinent and they used to settle here. And these movements of people, they enriched our culture also, right? When you travel, your culture is enriched. Like other people also get to know about your culture. Even our Indians, when we travel to US or somewhere, we carry all our things, like even our food, we carry pickles, appas and everything. And then even Americans get to know our culture, the way of food, the food we eat, and a way of clothing. They recognize, oh, he or she is an Indian by a way of clothing. So they come to recognize our culture, and our cultural traditions are enriched when you travel from one place to another. And even people have shared new ways of carving stone, composing music, and even cooking food over several hundreds of years. So even few skills were transferred from one person to another. Like you got to know some new skills, like carving stones and composing some new kind of music and cooking different varieties of food. Over all these years, so these were the developments that have taken place when people travel from one place to another. And we move on to the next slide. Here, how did the name Bharat, like we say India's Bharat, right? How did that name come? What's the origin of that name? Where did it what's its origin? So two of the words often used for our country, like I said just now, it's India and Bharat. The word India comes from the river Indus. So Indus, I told you just now from the map, right? So Indus was called as Sindhu. So India word comes from Indus. And actually the Iranians and Greeks who came from the northwest about 2500 years ago, they were familiar with the Indus river. Because people when they travel, as we know, they used to reside on the banks of river. So they were familiar with the river Indus and called it the Hindus or the Indus. So they came here and they were familiar with the Indus, and they called it the Hindus or the Indus. And the land to the east of the river was called India. So Indus is somewhere in the west, and to the east of the Indus there lies India. And hence the name India arrived, as it was east to the river Indus or Hindus, which was named then by the Greeks or Iranians who arrived to that particular river when 2500 years ago. And here you see this picture, right? Bharata. And then the name Bharata was used for a group of people who lived in the northwest. And as we told, who used to live in the northwest, here near the Indus, those group of people were actually called as Bharata. So those people who lived in the northwest and who are mentioned in the Rig Veda, you know our 4 Vedas, right? Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda and Atharva Veda. So as mentioned in the Rig Veda also, it was also mentioned in the Rig Veda. So the group of people who used to live in the northwest, they were called as Bharata, and later it transformed into the name of a country. So then the name of our country, the country came to be called as Bharata. Just because groups of people together form a country, right? Before it was called, if it was named for a group of people, and now it came to be the name of a country. And then finding out about the past. So where do you find out about your past? So where do you find out? Like, we can find out about the past by reading books written long ago. And some of these books are called as manuscripts, as they were written by hand. Because manuscript is a word originated from the Latin language. It's a Latin word called, where manu means, so manu meaning hand. So manu is hand and script is what you write. So the script written by hand is called as a manuscript. So by the old writings of manuscripts, you get to know about our past. And generally manuscripts are written on palm leaves, you know, leaves, right? Or on specially prepared bark of a tree, which is known as bitch. You know, bark of the tree, which is specially prepared for writing, is called as bitch. And it grows in Himalayas actually. You all see in movies, right? We see all the rishis and they carry some book like things, book with thick papers. That's very thick. Actually, it's made from bark of the leaf and it's called bitch. Okay. See, here you find two pictures. I think you have seen the leftmost picture many times in the movies, I think. In the spiritual kind of movies, the rishis used to carry these things. Like all the Vedas, their writings are written in this actually. And then here you can see this both manuscripts, right? The rightmost one is a palm leaf manuscript. It's written on a palm leaf. And now let us see where they have preserved some more points about manuscripts. The surviving manuscripts, the surviving manuscripts, they are carefully preserved in the temples and monasteries, and many of the manuscripts, and most of these manuscripts, they were destroyed either by insects or due to some other factors. And like during wars also you find many temples destructed, and then you even lost most of those manuscripts, and even either insects, because you know this lifetime the insects would eat off that wood or palm leaf. And then these books, they dealt with all kinds of subjects, like in these books all the religious beliefs and the practices, and even the lives of kings is also written in that. And even you know, Shushruta and Charaka are like they were the olden doctors, so they used to write some medicines, about the medicines. They were our ancient doctors actually. And even few science related things also we used to we used to get to know from these manuscripts. And then besides, there were some epics and poems and plays also written in these manuscripts. Like our ancient language is Sanskrit, right? So most of these are written in Sanskrit language, or they were also written in Prakrit. What is Prakrit is like, which is easily understood by the humans. It's like a local language, which is the language which is also understood by ordinary people. And also the other language is Tamil. So Sanskrit and Tamil are the two major languages, or even it used to be written in the local language, which used to be understood by the ordinary people, which is called as Prakrit. And moving on to the next slide, you can go through these pictures so later. You saw them now, right? And then what are the inscriptions? So you just now saw about the manuscripts. Then what are inscriptions? So inscriptions, like they are the form of recorded written data. So you inscript on stones or something. On hard substances, on hard objects, if you write something, then it's called as an inscription. Like these are the writings on relatively hard surfaces such as stones or metals. Sometimes kings got their orders inscribed so that people could see, read and obey them, right? If you want something to be like for a long time, something, if you write something on a paper, it's going to get erased as days go on. So better if you write things on a stone. On any hard objects, they would be visible for a long time. And even there are other kinds of inscriptions as well, like where men and women, like kings and queens, also they used to record what they did, like their victories in the battles. So their achievements were also recorded because they would be lifelong, right? What you write once on the stone, it can't be erased. So it was like a memory for them. And even their orders were written on the inscribed so that people could see and they could abide them, and it would be forever. So this is, see, you could see an inscription on the rightmost side. It's inscripted on the wall. Here we find who are archaeologists. You might have heard this name. So there were many other things that were made and used in the past. So those who study these objects. So these objects are studied, the objects in the past are studied by people called as archaeologists. And they study the remains of buildings which are made of stone, bricks, and also paintings and sculptures of the past. So see, you see these archaeologists, these all people are called as archaeologists. So see when they're working, how it is. One person is sketching something, one person is doing something with, I think is testing with some liquids. And here one person is measuring something, and here one person is making note of something. And here another person is searching something. So here all the archaeologists, they are on their own works. And then moving on to the next slide. They also explore and excavate things. Excavation in the sense they dig under the surface of the earth in order to find tools, weapons, pots, pans, ornaments and coins. So some of these objects, they may be made of stone, others like bone or clay or metal. And objects that are made hard, they are imperishable, right? They are not perishable. Means they don't go into, they're always existing, and that means they survive for a long time. And archaeologists, they also look for bones of the animals, because each animal has its respective bone structure. So if you get to know, if you got some bone, then you can find which animal's bone is it. And then you can think of it like that animal might have been reared in that point of time. You can even get to know the time, how many years back that bone was. Then because from the carbon dating method, we have the so-called method in chemistry, from which you can find the number of years that object was existing from. So if you get to, if you got some bone, then by that method you can know how much years long was that bone existing from. That means you can know the age of the bone, and also by the respective biological structure you can get to know which animal's bone it is. So then you can give a statement that this bone belongs to so and so animal and it was so and so long back. And so you can judge something like, okay, these people used to rear the animals at that place. So you can just find a story out of it. And even plants, actually plants, they don't exist for some hundreds of years, right? They just degrade. They're biodegradable, right? They just degrade into the soil. And seeds or grains, they might remain, or even pieces of wood. If they're burnt, then they remain in the charred form. That is in charred form if they are burnt. And so what are the sources of history? So how do you get, from where do you get? Those are called as sources, right? Historians, that is the scholars who study the past, are called as historians. So they use the word source to refer to the information which are found in manuscripts, inscriptions and archaeology. So what is the source for historians? From where do they gather all this history? They gather, for them, the sources are manuscripts, inscriptions and all the archaeological facts, what all they have discovered. And then once the sources are found, See, as just now we have framed a story out of those bones, in the same way the learning of the past comes on. So it's like an adventure, and they start to reconstruct it bit by bit from the sources. So historians and archaeologists, they're like detectives, you know. They just use all the sources and clues to find out about our pasts. And the word past is in the plural form. It's just to draw the attention of people that past varies from a group of people to the other set of people. Like, past is not the same from everyone, right? The past of a farmer is like, on the past of the farmer on one hand is not equal to the past of a king. A king has his own past and a farmer has his own past. So past is not the same for all, and hence it's given in the form of plural, pasts. So it's just to convey this thing. And then the lives of, see, they have stated below that lives of herders or farmers, they are different from those of kings and queens. And lives of merchants, they are different from those of craft persons and so on, and hence the plural pasts is used. And in the next slide also, it's true that even today people follow different practices. Even today the customs and practices are on the different parts of the world, they differ. And even a great deal about kings and the battles they fought, they are also well known because they kept records of all their victories, right? Some person used to write all their records of victories and all those things. But generally, ordinary people, you know, they don't write anything about themselves, like, you know, hunters and fishing folk. So even this archaeology, it helps us to find about the lives of these poor people also, because generally only kings have a record of all their victories or achievements, right? So these herders or these farmers, they don't keep records of all their daily activities. So this archaeology, they may help us to even find the lives of, and hence even this archaeology, it helps us to find the lives of these normal common people also, where a lot of things are unknown about them. And then what do dates mean? So we have the year 2020 running right now, right? So what's the year 2020? What is 2020? Like, from which point of time it's calculated? Does it mean the earth is formed just 2020 years ago? No, it has been formed millions and millions of years ago. But when? But then from which point of time did 2020, like 2020 is counted and now it's 2020? So what point of time is taken as reference? So these years, they are counted from the date which is assigned to the birth of Jesus Christ. You know Jesus Christ, right? He is the founder of Christianity. So, for an example, the year 2000 means that after the birth of Jesus Christ, after 2000 years of birth of Jesus Christ, that year is named as 2000. So now, by the year 2020, what do you mean? You mean that 2020 years after the birth of Jesus Christ, it's now 2020. Means the number of years after the birth of Jesus Christ are counted. And it's generally also called as AD, after the birth of Jesus Christ. It's also called as AD, which means Anno Domini. And then you say, before the birth of Jesus Christ also few people might have been existing, right? Then what year you mention them in what year? Because Jesus Christ, if you take his year to be 0, then after that you're just counting 1, 2, 3 and now it's 2020. Then what about the people who exist, like what about the years before the birth of Jesus Christ? Them you name it as. So the years before the birth of Jesus Christ, they are mentioned with the word letters BC, means before Christ. So if Jesus Christ, before the Jesus Christ, suppose it's 1 year before Jesus Christ, then you name it as 1 BC. So after the birth of the Jesus Christ, you name them with ADs or just like that, and then before you name it with BC. So then see the last slide of our class. Here you find some pictures, right? Here there are some buildings, and then here you find something inscripted on stones, like carved on stones. These are some women, I think their lifestyles. And then here you find a manuscript on which something is written, and here I think these are few things which belong to the olden days. All these are the sources of ancient Indian history, right? Because these are called as sources because from these things you can get much more information about a past. So these are regarded as the sources of ancient Indian history. So if you have a quick recap, today we learnt about, just go from reverse anyway. It takes a long time again to go to the first slide. how do we calculate dates, and then what are the sources of history, and then who are archaeologists, what are inscriptions, what are manuscripts, these are called manuscripts, and how did our name, the name Bharat is originated, and then what are the difficulties which are faced by the travelers, and what are the reasons for travels in the ancient times, and then what are the early settlements, when did they take place, and then where would early people live, and then how do we find out all these questions. So I think friends, you might have found the answers of all these questions after hearing to all this, listening to all these concepts of this chapter. So finally you're able to answer what happened many years ago, what people used to eat, and mostly what clothes they used to wear. You know how the enhancement has taken place, and then their modes of travel, etc., and how did they convey their information and get their skills from each other, their culture, etc. Most of your questions are answered in this chapter, I guess. So here we conclude a chapter, a first chapter, what, where, how, and when. So hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll be studying well. So all the best, and bye bye. Now this is Jahnavi. Bye.